books of history on the ocean floor, none is more mysterious or compelling than Titanic. This is the Titanic we all know, from books, films, and television. But there is another Titanic, never seen by human eyes.
We don't even have half of the pieces.
Until now.
No one's ever gone into that accident scene and mapped out all the elements.
This is the first time we're going to get this big picture.
A new expedition searches every inch of 15 square miles for the first time ever and finds every missing piece.
This was a big chunk of Titanic we had no idea existed.
Creating the first ever complete map of the entire wreck site, they look to unravel the disaster.
We're learning a lot for the first time about how Titanic really sank.
Virtually reassemble Titanic.
We're going to reconstruct the ship and raise it back up to where it last left the surface.
And attempt to solve a 100-year-old mystery. Did Titanic have a fatal flaw? It was an end violent beyond imagining. A structure as big as an 80-story building falling 2.5 miles. 40,000 tons of steel tearing itself to bits. When it was over, pieces lay scattered across 15 square miles. 100 years later, half of them have never been found. A new Titanic expedition is about to change that.
Well, we're here in St. John's, Newfoundland, aboard the Jean Charcot, the expedition ship that's going out to the Titanic wreck site.
Park Stevenson, Titanic historian, systems engineer, 20-year U.S. Navy veteran.
It's a beehive of activity. There's pallets being hoisted aboard. There are trailer vans being welded to the deck. This is a major effort.
A major effort that includes sonar and robot teams. U.S. government archaeologists Jim Delgado and Dave Alberg.
Sure.
Veteran Titanic explorer P.H. Nargelet. Oceanographer Dave Gallo from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Underwater imaging expert Bill Lang, also from Woods Hole. All working with RMS Titanic Incorporated, the legal steward or salvor in possession of the wreck site.
Welcome aboard. Chris Davino, president of RMS Titanic Inc.
Chris, what's the expedition trying to accomplish? What's the goal?
Primary objective is to map the entire wreck site. The objectives are clear. We want to do what the industry has been clamoring for a long time, and the equipment is finally available, which is a proper site survey map of the entire wreck site.
The plan is to just cover everything, the entire site.
There have been numerous expeditions that have gone down that have gained a sense of it, but it's almost been like a drive-by through a darkened city at night, looking at things with a flashlight and trying to draw a street map of the city.
You can walk around the city. You'd see some pretty amazing stuff, but you'd have no idea where you were, what you saw, what it's in context, what you missed. And so we're going to go far and wide.
When it's done, this expedition will have mapped every inch of the wreck site and found every piece of Titanic.
We expect this to be the high point now.
But even that won't be enough to unlock the final secrets of the disaster. Titanic was supposed to be state-of-the-art, practically unsinkable. Yet in less than 3 hours, she broke apart and sank, killing 1,500 people. Did the ship have a built-in weakness, faulty materials, or a design flaw? These are the questions Park Stevenson hopes to answer. The expedition will bring back evidence, but interpreting what it means is a whole other job. Investigating an airliner or shuttle crash The pieces are collected, brought to a hangar, and studied to learn how it broke apart, what went wrong, and why. It's the same with Titanic. The pieces hold the answers.
The assumption immediately after the disaster...
To help visualize the pieces in 3 dimensions, Park Stevenson will use a virtual reconstruction of the wreck site here in this hangar.
Here, let me give you a demonstration here. The deckhouse debris is up there. Later, when we got the tower debris and fit it right there, we found out that it was...
Really, the virtual hangar allows us to simulate spatial relationships, which sometimes can be critical to understanding how pieces can go back together again. You can see
over the next year, Parks will work with a growing team of experts.
You can just see the way the bow crashed into the bottom like that.
Including marine artist Ken Marshall.
I'm all about figuring out Titanic debris. I just love it. I'm passionate about it. It's putting pieces of a puzzle together. All my life, I've wanted to bring Titanic back to life.
What I'm eager to see is what's out there in the dark, the things that haven't been seen before.
Consulting with the team is accident investigator Jim Childs.
Just like the NTSB investigating an airline crash or a shuttle crash, if we want to find out what really happened to the Titanic that night, we need to know the debris field because the answers lie in those pieces.
The problem is, the most important pieces, the ones from the fracture zone where the ship broke, have never been found.
And that's really the key to understanding the breakup, is understanding the middle section. And we can't understand the middle section until we get at least a majority of the pieces back.
That is what this new expedition is all about.
We got to readjust the rigging.
Well, that's perfect.
There have been nearly 20 expeditions to Titanic since it was discovered in 1985. But they've all gone to the same places, over and over again.
You get these touristy views of the bow, the bridge, the propellers, a cabin or two, but we don't know the whole site.
No one has ever mapped the entire site, found every piece of wreckage.
If you want to investigate exactly how that ship came apart, it should be there, recorded on the objects left on the seafloor.
We feel that there are significant portions that have really never been seen before, and we hope to prove or disprove theories on how the ship actually came apart.
Preparations complete, they head for Titanic. The only wild card, weather.
So for the next 20 some odd days, it's this team on this vessel out there doing what we need to do with Mother Nature. So we'll see what happens.
Their objective, the world's most famous shipwreck, was born out of intense competition at the dawn of the 20th century.
It was a response by the White Star Line to basically a challenge from the Cunard Line.
The competing Cunard Line had just come out with Lusitania and Mauretania in 1907, and all the White Star ships were looking very small and pokey.
And the White Star Line decided, we won't build record breakers in terms of speed, but let's build record breakers in terms of size and comfort and luxury.
She sailed on April 10th, 1912 from Southampton, went across the channel to Cherbourg, France, where she picked up more passengers, cut over to Queenstown, Ireland to pick up the last passengers. Then she headed out across the Atlantic.
In 4 days, the roughly 1,300 passengers and 900 crew on board will meet their fate. The questions and accusations that arise that night still resonate. Why was Titanic speeding through a known ice field? Why weren't there enough lifeboats? Were Titanic's materials or design defective? 100 years later, the search for answers continues.
It's the second full day of the expedition now. We're going to be arriving over the actual site of the Titanic wreck.
As we got on the site, We had a short ceremony where each of the members of the crew were asked to come up and take some flowers and toss them into the ocean.
A lot's been made of this mission. All the equipment we're deploying, all the experts that we've brought together. But it's important to note, at the end of the day, this is really an effort to preserve the legacy of Titanic and honor the memory of all those that perished that night.
To me, the memorial site's more at the surface than on the seabed, simply because so many people lost their lives at the surface.
After the ceremony, preparations resume for the first dive.
Bridge, back deck.
But already, there's trouble.
We've got not one but two hurricanes moving up the coast. What do? Do we just move off of the site and let one hurricane go through? Then what happens if another one is coming up right behind it?
There have been expeditions that were totally scrapped because of weather, and that would be heartbreaking.
Mapped out the...
Expedition leaders Dave Gallo and Chris Davino decide to take a chance and remain on site.
Keep winching out.
In just a few hours, the cameras will splash in.
Okay, here we go.
And begin sending up the first images of Titanic. 360 miles southeast of Newfoundland, an unprecedented expedition team assembles over Titanic. 100 years after the sinking, the goal is to map every inch of the wreck site.
We're looking at a bigger area than ever before.
Find every missing piece.
There have been dozens of expeditions to Titanic, but really no one has even tried to accomplish creating really a comprehensive site survey map of this wreck site.
If they succeed, the map may help experts learn how the ship broke apart.
No one's ever gone into that scene, you could call it a crime scene if you want, that accident scene, and mapped out all the elements. And if you want to investigate exactly how that ship came apart, it should be there, recorded on the objects left on the seafloor.
Say maybe the bow.
What the team wants to find is pieces from Titanic's missing middle, the exact point where the ship broke.
We want to go back and try and find this down here.
Basically, I'm hoping to find all the rest of the pieces that we need to put that together. And of that middle section, I would say we don't even have half of the pieces.
With 15 square miles of ocean bottom to search, it won't be easy.
We're going to try to image the wreck site as much as we possibly can. We want to get that near 100% coverage of the wreck. That hasn't been done before.
To do it, they'll use state-of-the-art high-definition cameras built by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the world's top experts in underwater photography.
That's it. A little bit more.
No humans will dive to Titanic. Instead, the cameras will be mounted on a robot tethered to the ship by miles of cable. The remotely operated vehicle, ROV, a spaceship of the deep. Built in Largo, Maryland, it's one of the most sophisticated ocean robots on the planet.
I don't know exact numbers, but there are very few vehicles in the world that can go to 6,000 meters. This is almost a one of a kind.
In a world of total darkness, the ROV must provide light, maneuver gracefully, and endure 5 tons of pressure on every square inch of its surface.
If there's an air bubble inside the piece of equipment, it will crush in a heartbeat.
Finally, after months of planning and millions of dollars, it's time for the ROV's first dive.
The ship is 095.
Roger.
It always looks easy in the films, where, you go, you put the ROV in the water, it goes down and it works. Well, I mean, the reality is there's always a bit of trepidation the first time you put something in the water that hasn't been used before.
Watch the cable right there.
2.5 miles down and a world away, Titanic. 100 years ago, when Titanic made its descent, 700 survivors remained on the surface. 4 days later, when they reached New York aboard the rescue ship Carpathia, Senator William Smith of Michigan begins an investigation. The world has questions. While the expedition team awaits their first views of Titanic, back on land, accident investigator Jim Childs probes historical archives.
So many stories that have built up. 100 years on, what holds up? What's the truth? Ice. Why did they go full speed into an ice field? Why would anyone do such a thing? The strength of the ship. One of the theories to come forward was weak rivet heads that sheared, that broke too easily, opened up the seams, and the failure begins. Where's the truth to that? Lifeboats. Did it rise to negligence? To not have enough lifeboats? Not nearly enough seats on those lifeboats? The ship's breakup. How did the metal bend? Why did that fracture start? Is there a chance that there was a design flaw built into the Titanic?
Each question points blame at a particular person. Captain Smith for going so fast into ice. White Star Chairman Bruce Ismay for the number of lifeboats. And if rivets or design were defective, naval architect Thomas Andrews.
Did the ship have a built-in weakness to it, fatal flaw, or not?
In 1912, with no physical evidence to examine, Senator William Smith's investigation concludes Titanic sank intact. In its report, the British Board of Trade agrees the ship did not break. To help visualize the site in 3 dimensions, the team is using a virtual reconstruction of the known pieces of wreckage in this hangar.
In 1912, when Titanic sank, the general consensus was that she sank intact.
This is what they imagine Titanic looked like.
A lot of the eyewitnesses distinctly saw it break in two. That's what they said. But the official line, again, was that she went down intact.
I think that was the reason.
It will be more than 70 years before the breakup is confirmed. And even today, the details of how Titanic broke remain unknown.
We're just about to hit the bottom here.
This expedition may finally unravel the mystery, if they can find an image missing pieces never before seen.
We have a lot of things that can conspire against us. You know, we essentially have a ship, and 2.5 miles away at the end of a tether, we've got an ROV. Well, there's a lot that can happen with that cable.
Go ahead.
Do you feel you're fighting against the umbilical on the seabed? But we don't want to dump too much cable just to get over to it, because then we have to worry about wrapping the cable around stuff.
Okay, roger that.
The time comes in the dive when we're going to get our first images of the wreck. The shadow appears in the distance, outside the range of the lights. Lights start to reach it, illuminate it, and all of a sudden, there's Titanic.
I'm just, can you imagine we're doing this live? I'm just stunned.
On this first dive, they'll image the bow section. It's familiar territory, but breathtaking nevertheless.
I mean, to sit in the room and see on these huge monitors live shots of Titanic, it's incredible.
The first images coming up are staggering. There you are in the bottom of the ocean, transported to the seafloor. It's mind-boggling. Even the veterans that have been to Titanic numerous times are slack-jawed.
But this is just the beginning. The real mission is finding new wreckage. Once they head out into the unknown, anything is possible.
We're getting really close now.
Wow. At any moment, just beyond the lights, could be a never-before-seen piece that holds the secret of the breakup.
Power back up. Right
in the frame. Put it in the frame. Lower.
The most ambitious Titanic expedition ever attempted is searching for pieces never before seen and creating the first complete map of the wreck site.
In 85 to 87, over 20 years ago, they started a map on Titanic that was never finished, and basically we're here to finish the job.
Survey ROV.
Right now, they're starting their first dive, exploring the bow. Special glasses let them see the imagery in 3D.
That's the hull and the mud line right there.
Good. That's what we need right there.
Most of these veterans have been to Titanic before, but Woods Hole's new high-definition cameras are an eye-opener. The bridge. The roof and walls are gone. On this spot, where previous expeditions have left memorial plaques, Quartermaster Hitchens tried frantically to steer around the iceberg.
I really gained a sense that this site is more than just broken pieces of a ship. It's everything that was in that ship. Everything. From the supplies and the equipment to the baggage to the people themselves.
The people. A few are still remembered, but most on Titanic that night are lost to us now. Yet there are still stories and secrets being uncovered. Stories about people like George Thorne and his wife Maybelle traveling in first class.
They're a well-to-do couple, very upper crust, from New York. George's business was being a hat dresser, and he was taking a round-the-world tour.
An elaborate leaded glass window in the first-class dining saloon. George and Maybelle undoubtedly enjoyed sumptuous meals here. And strolled here, the first-class promenade. On Titanic, the different classes rarely mingled. Near the stern, not far from first class, but a world away, was the second-class library. Among the passengers who might have relaxed here is Franz Pullbaum from New York.
He was a mechanic, and he eventually wound up in the employ of the Witching Waves Company, an organization that manufactured Coney Island thrill rides.
Introduced in 1907 by inventor Theophilus Van Kannel, the Witching Waves ride was a forerunner to today's bumper cars. Its popularity spread across the U.S. and abroad, which meant business trips for Franz Pullbaum.
They wanted to open up a ride in Luna Park in Paris, France. So Pullbaum was sent across to France to start the installation.
Franz Pullbaum does such a good job that his boss, Van Kannel, gives him a bonus, stock in the company, plus an upgrade for his trip back to New York. Instead of returning on a French ship, he'll switch and take the fancy new liner, Titanic. To the White Star Line, the really important passengers, the ones who bring in the most revenue, were the ones who might have stood here on the third-class promenade deck. Immigrants, like 19-year-old Margaret Devaney, coming to America from Ireland.
Life in third class was like a luxury resort hotel at sea for these people. It was probably the first time in their lives they had as much food as they could eat, and that was covered in the cost of the ticket. They had a general room fitted with a piano for the ladies and the children.
The third-class general room was in the stern. When Titanic broke, the heavy stern section slammed into the ocean floor with such force that it was completely devastated. Today, the stern is almost unrecognizable.
Did this get knocked off, or did it get deposited on the seabed?
This first look at the wreck is proving just how good Woods Hole's new cameras really are. The stunning imagery, shot in high-definition 2D and 3D, is a far cry from what was possible back in 1985, when Robert Ballard set out to find Titanic. Bill Lang was there.
It's midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. We'd seen enough debris that we said there's got to be something big around here. Finally decided we better wake Bob up and the rest of the team up, because we were starting to go over things like boilers. When we saw the boiler, there were only 3 ships in the world that were built with that design of boiler, and we knew where the other 2 were. So,
after 73 years, Titanic is found. But with the discovery, a new mystery is born: the breakup.
We had no idea the ship had broken in 2.
For Titanic historians, the 1985 discovery of the breakup was a revelation.
We had all come to accept that the ship had sunk in one piece. And if you're finding a boiler, that can only mean one thing. It either fell through a little hole or the whole ship came apart.
Stern was found about 2,000 feet away to the south.
Ships aren't supposed to break in half. And to me, that raises the question, was there a fatal flaw?
The fantasy of Titanic intact was replaced by proof that the ship had broken apart, which raised questions. How and why did Titanic break? Were materials or design defective?
That's where fantasy gave way to slowly and methodically building the evidence, collecting the imagery, identifying things, the forensic study and analysis of Titanic.
And where we found all the whistle?
The forensic study and analysis of Titanic may be revolutionized by this expedition.
Okay. I'm going to zoom a bit.
Now that the technology is tested and working, the next step is to move away from the familiar and out into the unknown. The debris field, home to thousands of pieces of Titanic never before seen.
That's right.
But before they can start searching, there's a problem.
The captain just said the storm's gotten a little bit bigger and is now steaming directly at us.
With 2 hurricanes bearing down on us, it makes more sense to pull into port and wait these storms out. It's just frustrating because we had just been bringing back some incredible data.
So we need to leave. I told the ROV team that we need to get off the bottom. Went back to my room, and then Bill Lang knocked on the door.
Had to go into his cabin telling him what problems we were having. Because we have miles and miles of this cable. There's a lot of things that can get hooked on.
Yeah, we have about 4,000 meters of cable out.
And one of the RV operators came in and whispered in my ear and said, "We've got a problem.
We have a horrible situation."
And, Dave and I looked at each other.
We've got a hurricane en route, and we're snagged on the Titanic. This is not good.
The ROV tether is caught in the wreckage.
The captain says we gotta go. So you have a couple of choices to make. One is, do you pull and close your eyes and pull real hard? And in that case, we pull up a piece of Titanic. Not good. Career-ending move. Or do you cut the cable
and leave millions of dollars of equipment on ocean floor, and this mission would be over.
There's a storm coming. Could lose a vehicle.
The first expedition to Titanic in years is searching for new pieces and making the first ever map of the entire wreck site. But now there's a hurricane approaching, and the ROV's tether is snagged on the wreck. Inside the ROV control room, pilot Mark Heinrich is desperately trying to free the vehicle.
The current switched direction, and it laid a cable right over the top of the wreck. The cable has gotten in a slot on the side of the ship that's about 2 inches wide. The cable pinched itself in this piece of metal. It just pinched tight as can be. Well,
we're currently in about the worst situation you could possibly be with an ROV in the water. And that is right at this minute, we got the ROV snagged, and we've got a small number of hours before this hurricane is on this spot.
The storm is going to travel faster than we can, so we have to make sure that, you know, we err on the side of caution there as well and get out of here in time.
So ship safety comes first, and we're out of here.
I mean, to say it's tense is pretty much an understatement.
What? Power back up.
Carrying 7 channels of video, 3,000 volts of power, and all commands to the vehicle, this cable is the ROV's lifeline.
And this is going to be bad. The snare is pinching my cable, and it could break the fibers at any minute and cause the vehicle to shut off, and then we'd have no idea how to get it untangled.
We effectively have 2 choices. One, we could either cut the cable and leave millions of dollars of equipment on the ocean floor, and this mission would be over. Or we could begin to winch up the ROV, and we might seriously damage Titanic.
All right, bridge ROV, can you move east towards the bow of the ship?
You know, all of our hearts are stopped. It's very quiet.
We're going to have to make that decision, one or the other. Cut the cord or pull.
Get up there. I could ram into it, push it over, but I can't even get up there. Full up.
So is this the sand this way, the direction he's heading?
He used the light arm and a light to hook the tether.
Let's come back up and see if that pulled free. And all of a sudden, it just popped out.
That's it. We're free! Woohoo! Yahtzee!
I mean, a phenomenal piece of piloting on his part.
Less than an hour before we had to be out of here. One of the happiest moments at sea of my life.
Way to go, boys. You had the boys sweating there for a while, I'm telling you. They're all up their bullets.
Luckily, patience paid off, and we were able to save the ROV and our careers.
Hold on. Just gonna tap.
Just in time, they make it back to St. John's, 360 miles away.
Okay, you got about a meter, half a meter to go.
We're not going to stop until this is done. We are all itching, especially me. I am itching to get back out there and to pick up where we left off.
Yeah. The entry points are.
They know pieces are out there that have never been found, including the missing middle. The middle is the key to understanding how and why Titanic broke apart, and whether it was a weak ship.
The middle of the ship is where all the action was going on. I mean, like I said, we've got the bow section, we've got the stern section. Everything in between are all those parts in motion.
One part of the missing middle was found in 2005 on a previous history expedition when Bill Lang suggested going east.
We knew we had targets that were to the east of the stern that people really hadn't ever looked at.
Shipwreck explorers John Chatterton and Richie Kohler documented the discovery.
Right over here we got something.
We're looking at the bottom of the ship.
That's double hull.
Spectacular. This is the entire bottom of the ship, the entire bottom from port to starboard.
The pieces were from Titanic's double bottom. The double bottom is the spine of the ship and the key to its strength.
2 huge sections found out on the eastern side of the debris field.
To identify where on the ship they came from, the team turned to Ken Marshall.
Where's the first thing? I was tasked to do diagrams of what these 2 pieces looked like. Each individual piece I drew and carefully figured out inch by inch the plates and what these edges looked like. I remember the moment when I tried to see, are these things going to connect? To my great satisfaction, I found that these two pieces fit together perfectly.
So these pieces are right at the point where Titanic broke apart.
This was the first piece of the puzzle of the missing middle section, and everything else was going to derive from this.
Finding the rest of the missing middle is up to this expedition team.
Take the tension on that.
With the hurricane gone, they're back at Titanic. Now they can start work creating the first map of the complete site and searching for all the missing pieces.
What we're looking for in this mapping project is to see where the pieces lie all in relation to each other. That's going to be the importance of this sonar map.
It's much too big a job for the tethered ROV. Instead, for the first time in underwater exploration, they'll use a pair of these. AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, self-guided robots carrying high-resolution sonar.
The ROV are very good at looking at things close up, but to try to get an overall picture of what the wreck looks like and the debris field around it. That's what the AUV is bringing to this search.
They've got a pair of them, named after two women lost at sea on a 3-hour tour, Ginger and Mary Ann.
Proceed at 2 knots to the launch point.
All right, now, so you can deploy.
The AUVs are basically automatic torpedo-like robots that are autonomous. We tell them what to do, we get them down there, we get them back to the surface, we get what we want from them, we start over again.
Vehicle is in the water.
Ginger and Mary Ann will map an area 3 by 5 miles running back and forth, mowing the lawn.
You draw a box, you run down one length, you turn, you come back. Just like being out in the backyard and going back and forth with your mower.
This map will be the first look anyone has ever had at the entire wreck site, 15 square miles.
We're looking at a bigger area than ever before, and all of that's going to get stitched together into the final mosaic.
After a century in the darkness, every unknown object, every missing piece of Titanic is about to be revealed. It's time to make the map and explore what no one has seen for 100 years.
Down a little bit, Des.
The most ambitious expedition to Titanic ever attempted is searching for every missing piece of wreckage. And for the first time, mapping the entire 15 square mile wreck site.
The debris field is holy ground. When investigators arrive at the scene of a disaster, first and foremost thing is to map the debris. You want to have a complete record of where every piece came to rest before it is then brought to the hangar and squeezed for more secrets.
To map Titanic 2.5 miles down, the team is using a pair of smart robots nicknamed Ginger and Mary Ann.
We clear below?
Autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs.
With the AUVs, with Mary Ann and Ginger, we've essentially, this is a whole new era of shipwreck exploration and ocean exploration. Nothing had been done like that before, ever, in the deep sea.
Ready to launch.
It will take over a week to gather the data.
As I speak right now, they're down there doing their thing on their own, and when the program tells them to, they'll come back up and we'll catch them and we'll get their data.
Running back-to-back 20-hour missions, the AUVs don't stop for meals or sleep.
Right now, the humans are trying as hard as they can to keep up with the vehicles.
Then suddenly, one of the AUVs aborts.
What's going on? This vehicle has stopped running and it came to the surface on its own.
Ginger has returned to the ship, dragging something from Titanic's wreck site behind her.
Greg and I were on the back deck, both noticed that there's a couple of lines, that we can see these 2 lines trailing from the vehicle. And we're stunned.
We don't have options, and we gotta have options.
The boat goes off, finds the vehicle, brings it back over to the ship, and at the end of it is a line shooting straight down through the water like it has something hanging from it.
A piece of the wreck? Or something else?
We keep on pulling this line and recovering it, and lo and behold, what we're eventually recovering on board the deck is a large lead anchor from a previous expedition.
Thanks to this ugly old anchor, beautiful Ginger was almost lost.
I think it weighed 4 or 5 pounds less than our buoyancy profile. So if it had carried up another handful of muck, it probably would have anchored our $2 million vehicle to the bottom of the ocean.
After a quick inspection and freshening up, Ginger rejoins Marianne and the mapping resumes. But until they have that map, with half the wreck site still unexplored, questions about how Titanic broke up and whether she was a weak, badly designed ship will remain unanswered. One critical factor in the disaster is not open to question at all: the weather. The night of April 14th, 1912, it's exceptional.
The calmest ocean that sailors on board who had been to sea their entire careers had ever seen in their years of service. No moon, so they had no light except for starlight.
No moon and flat calm are stunningly beautiful, yet a deadly combination.
Because it was that glassy smooth, you have no waves, no breaking of any foam around the base of an iceberg.
The lookout Frederick Fleet sees a mass of blackness in front of the ship. He doesn't see the berg. What he sees is the absence of stars and an interruption in the horizon. He rings the bell 3 times, races to the telephone, and says, "Ice right ahead." Within seconds, the Titanic has collided with the iceberg.
How strongly you felt the collision depended on where you were on the ship. High up in first class, it's possible George and Maybelle Thorne weren't even aware of it. Lower down in second class, Franz Pohlbaum probably noticed some vibration. Third-class passengers like Margaret Devaney would have felt the greatest impact. There's only one surviving eyewitness to the actual point of damage: Fireman Frederick Barrett in Boiler Room 6. What Barrett sees will later prove critical to understanding Titanic's sinking.
Numerous compartments are open to the sea, and they now begin to flood.
It's not long before they determine that the wound is fatal and the ship is going to founder.
It took less than 60 seconds to seal Titanic's fate. She will hang on. For 2 hours and 40 minutes. And then she's gone, leaving questions, suspicions, and mysteries. A century later, some things are known. In this hangar, where the team is constructing a virtual wreck site, small trails of knowledge show where previous expeditions have searched.
Time and again.
But even after nearly 20 expeditions, half the site is still unexplored.
Large pieces of debris, and there's so much more out there we suspect, but the data hasn't come back yet.
The data that's needed, the map, is what this expedition is all about. After days of marathon AUV runs, they're getting the final download to print out the first version.
Data cable has been plugged in.
Here we go. Right now we're trying to print out the sonar scan map that the AUVs created.
A number of us gathered to view what people have these guys have been waiting for literally decades, a proper map of Titanic.
See, look at this thing. Holy shit. Something you don't know about here. Look at that. What we see so far is really exciting and really promising that we've mapped far and wide. All this stuff is brand new to us.
There's a lot of artifacts scattered.
Yeah.
Object after object, never before seen.
They're huge. Some of them like 3 stories.
The first version of the map is just a paper printout, but when it's fully processed by the computer, this is what it reveals. The bow section, pointing northeast. Half a mile to the south, the devastated stern, facing the opposite direction. And all around, debris. Countless small fragments, scores of huge pieces, mostly to the east of the stern.
To me, it's all about a map. You know, something that you can roll out and put on a table and point to and draw on. It's tough to top that.
With this map, they can now send cameras to photograph the mystery pieces, and human eyes will get their first look at them in 100 years.
What's this?
I don't know what that is. Hot diggity dam.
The most ambitious Titanic expedition ever made has completed the first sonar map of the entire wreck site.
To be able to go and see an area of 3 by 5 miles, for example, in the deep ocean is incredible. Having that image is something that every expedition's always wanted.
This one is a huge one.
It's the first time anyone's been able to view the complete scene of the disaster. And it's full of objects that may be pieces of Titanic never before seen.
We are using the map to identify what the principal targets are. What do we want to get? What are the, let's prioritize them.
With the benefit of this map, we can now go out with the ROV and do, targeted high-def video footage to identify some objects that haven't been imaged before. This is going to be amazing.
These are definitely objects.
So why don't we hear?
Hundreds of unknown pieces. The team has selected promising targets, and now the ROV is going in with cameras to get close-up images.
Turn to your port.
That's where I want to be.
The ROV approaches the first target. Lying in front of the bow, the forward hatch cover. When the bow hit bottom, the cover flew off and landed in the mud. Far to the south and east, a triangle of huge objects. 2 were identified by the 2005 History Expedition. Giant pieces of double bottom, the ship's spine, 70 feet of Titanic's hull right where she broke. At the edges of the break, holes where rivets gave way. The third, a pile as big as a 3-story building, is a mystery.
Okay, here we go. We're getting really close now.
First glimpsed in 2005, this pile has never been documented in such detail before. Closer to the stern, a cluster of 5 boilers weighing over 50 tons each. In these massive cylinders, coal was burned to create the steam that powered the entire ship. Hidden near one of the boilers, a frame for a revolving door. Wreckage never seen before now. It was supplied by the same man who designed the Witching Waves ride, Theophilus Van Cannel, passenger Franz Poolbaum's boss. Northeast of the boilers, a huge section of Titanic's side called shell plating. Longer than 60 feet and probably weighing over 40 tons, its inch-thick steel is bent 90 degrees by the violence. The top of the number 2 funnel, pancaked almost beyond recognition. The bronze steam whistles give it away. Just off the side of the stern, still another gigantic pile, over 100 feet across. It's a tangle of multiple decks, never identified. North of the stern, a low-pressure engine cylinder, part of Titanic's power plant. And right next to the cylinder, a towering pile, at least 30 feet tall, the size of an apartment building. More mystery debris, probably from the missing middle.
We are starting to notice additional pieces in the debris field that help fill in the missing areas of the wreck and that hold some interesting clues on how the ship broke up and sank, we hope.
There are multiple big pieces that we didn't know about. Certainly a lot of clues in what we've seen that will help us piece together the details of how Titanic actually made its way to the bottom.
Right in the frame, put it in the frame.
Nearly a week of dives follows.
Does that make sense?
Object after object is imaged for the first time.
Well, what is it, though?
This is the block that we surveyed.
Roger. Bridge survey.
Finally, almost a month after they started out, the last dive ends.
All right, good. Great job, guys. Great job.
The expedition has done its job.
No,
At last, a century after Titanic sank, a complete map of the site now exists, as does high-definition video of all the newly discovered debris. The first step, gathering information, has been a success. Next comes the most important part, the long process of figuring out what all these new clues mean.
Now our analysis can really take off.
You'll see these way before we're done. We're starting to do CSI Titanic, so we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty.
What happened that night? Why are certain sections of the ship in certain places? We hope piecing the ship back together to unlock the mysteries of what really happened that night.
Why did the supposedly unsinkable ship go down so fast? Did Titanic have defective materials or a design flaw? The team's search for answers is about to begin.
We go to the end of the key there.
The most ambitious expedition ever to explore Titanic is back in port, with hours of high-def imagery and the first complete map of the entire wreck site.
The map itself, obviously, is a first-time ever work product. People have been clamoring for this on Titanic for literally decades.
Now comes the critical phase.
Getting together to begin the analysis.
How's it going? Pretty good.
For the first time, this group is, really looking at the data and the imagery that we brought back. It'll be interesting to see what people think about it.
What's going to be good about this is now with this level of detail, what looks like chaos actually has patterns.
It's up to this team to decipher those patterns. Everyone is interested in the sinking, but in addition, each member will use the map and video for their own specialty.
Everybody's skill set and data coming together to give us.
U.S. government scientists James Delgado and Dave Alberg will study Titanic as an archaeological site.
Say, okay, this is how it's changing.
Woods Hole oceanographer Dave Gallo will examine the sea floor around the wreck. Bill Lang will concentrate on the imagery, working to create wide-angle views of Titanic that have never been seen before.
Those optical mosaics.
Park Stevenson will pursue two separate lines of inquiry. One, he'll investigate the strength of Titanic's rivets. Two, he'll work with marine artist Ken Marshall and RMS Titanic historian Bill Sauder to identify new pieces of wreckage.
The spatial relationships that each piece has to each other is going to be critical.
When all this work is done, it will represent the greatest body of scientific knowledge ever assembled on Titanic.
In the analysis, because it hasn't been done before, it could take months, it could take years, so we're really anxious to get at that step.
Now the team splits up, and everyone gets to work on their own. In Virginia, marine archaeologists Jim Delgado and Dave Alberg are beginning to monitor Titanic as an archaeological site.
You get that sense of the evidence of people in the form of their belongings, their shoes, particularly the shoes, and the realization.
The goal of marine archaeology is to better understand the past, and particular human beings in the past, through what's left behind. Everything that was enclosed in that ship, now spread out on the seabed, tells us about them.
This isn't just an intellectual exercise. This was a tragedy of the first order. I think that working with the artifacts recovered from Titanic has filled in a lot of personal details about the passengers who have been lost and which we would never know unless those artifacts have been recovered.
Over 5,000 artifacts have been retrieved since 1985. They are preserved and exhibited by RMS Titanic Incorporated. Curator of the collection is Alex Klingelhofer.
If you look closely at an ordinary, everyday object, then you suddenly see the world open up and you have a completely new story and insight into the life of one of the passengers on Titanic.
Among the passengers whose artifacts have been recovered, Franz Polbaum. His suitcase held his tape measure and stock certificate from the Witching Waves Company. George and Maybelle Thorne's bag contained a luggage receipt from Sri Lanka, documents from Bombay, Egypt, Japan, and a letter that reveals a scandal they were keeping secret.
He was taking a round-the-world trip with a woman that was not his wife. She's married to one man in New York and traveling around the world with another man who's not her husband.
To keep the secret, George has been forging his name. Documents in his bag reveal he's really George Rosenshine. Margaret Devaney's story is also brought to life by an artifact. A pocket knife given to her by her brother as she was leaving home in Ireland. The night Titanic hit the iceberg, Margaret was peeling apples using this knife. Keeping the knife with her would prove to have profound consequences.
And so what lies down there today is a time capsule of 1912. Who they were, how they lived, and in some circumstances, even how they died.
A day and a half away from those dreams starting.
While the archaeologists start their work, Park Stevenson is about to show Ken Marshall and Bill Sauder what the expedition brought back.
I could not contact Bill or Ken quick enough because I had seen things in the imagery that just blew my mind.
They meet in Parks' hometown of San Diego at one of his favorite spots, the historic steamship Berkeley.
The architecture aboard, especially in her saloon deck, is very reminiscent of Titanic. So what better place to look at the imagery than in an environment that evoked that age? We had these beautiful tie-ins to the Titanic story right there as we do our analysis.
I think one of the genius things about this expedition, something that's never been done before, was the way they created a map, which I'm going to pull up right here. Now, here you see essentially the full wreck site, but what I can do here is can zoom in on areas.
This is like looking at the dark side of the moon for the first time.
Yes. Is we now can see how the pieces landed on the bottom.
Right.
Which is, you know, a critical part of any crime scene.
And what's really interesting is look at how it shows all the bottom scalloping. You see that it's like these items are actually sitting in impact basins.
Just like a meteoroid had hit the moon.
Right.
Copernicus.
Okay, here's something I'm really excited to show to you. I want you to take a look at this.
Okay.
Look at the height of that thing.
It looks like a block of apartments.
Which
that just fell out of the
really,
sky.
this is a massive piece.
Once we have identified what these pieces are, then we can start our process of putting the ship back together.
There's a lot of material here. I mean, a lot.
Over the coming months, Ken Marshall and Bill Souder will study hours of underwater video. And Parks will investigate whether weak rivets may have been a factor in Titanic's sinking. Expedition video reveals some places where rivets broke and popped out of their holes. But Parks has also seen other places where inch-thick steel is bent into an S-curve, yet the rivets held and did not pop. Were Titanic's rivets defective?
There's some things going on in here that we don't understand.
How and why did Titanic break? Were there errors in design? The team is closing in on the mystery. 100 years after the sinking, the sonar map and ROV video are helping the different teams close in on a new picture of how Titanic sank.
Explosive force.
Figure out how the ship broke apart and whether it had a fatal flaw. Some experts believe that it did. It's rivets. Expedition video shows empty holes where rivets gave way. But in other places, despite radical bending, rivets held strong.
So Dan, I'm excited.
To learn more about rivets, Park Stevenson is in Seattle with Titanic historian Daniel Butler.
Parks, how you doing?
Blacksmith Steve Howell and Butler have produced historically correct replicas of Titanic's rivets using 100-year-old iron.
I was able to get the specifications for the rivets that were used in the Titanic from Harland and Wolff in Belfast.
The age of the material is from the early 1900s, but it's very close to the same species of wrought iron used in the Titanic.
Titanic was made of steel plates held together by rivets. 3 million of them. Some believe those rivets were made of inferior metal, and they failed too easily during the collision, opening a seam between two plates. This scenario is borne out by testimony from the only surviving eyewitness to the damage, fireman Frederick Barrett, down in Boiler Room 6.
He describes water coming in very fast, 2 feet above the plates on which he was standing. It puts it at a junction between 2 of the plates that make up the side of the hull, which implies rivets failed for whatever reason.
The texture of...
So to investigate the weak rivet theory, the men are planning a test. Steve Howell has built an exact replica of Titanic's seam, based on original blueprints. 1-inch steel plate held together by rivets made of 100-year-old iron.
It's virtually 1.5 pounds of wrought iron per rivet. In one shot, you've got to take that and just pow, and really just force that into that hole as quickly as possible.
At 1 foot by 4 feet, this riveted steel section is like a tiny piece of Titanic's side. Yet even so, it weighs 300 pounds.
We're ready to load out, guys.
Next, they'll take the samples to the University of Washington Materials Science Lab to put Titanic's rivets to the test.
The civil engineering department has machines set up that test stress. We're going to use it to test the strength of our Titanic specimens against forces that would have been encountered during the collision.
The machine, a hydraulic test frame, will apply crushing force to the sample, just like the iceberg would have applied force to Titanic. They know rivets will break. The question is, how will they break?
The prevailing thought is that once a rivet head goes, they all unzip.
According to this theory, it's like a house of cards. As soon as one fails, the rest immediately collapse. No one will ever know exactly how much force the iceberg exerted. But if the critics are right, once one rivet fails, the others will also fail in quick succession, unzipping the entire seam.
So, Vince, you ready to start applying it? Go ahead.
Like this, there's some separation. 10,000 pounds. Really? Wow. 20,000.
A compression stress on the plate itself.
A rivet pops.
30,000. The material.
The pressure continues to rise.
This side.
But the other rivets don't unzip.
That's as far as it'll go.
The steel has deformed, but the seam is still intact.
Yeah. Looks like the joint's pretty strong.
With wrought iron rivets.
Yeah.
Not a simple failure by any means.
No, and they could be.
Titanic's rivets don't seem to be a fatal flaw. But there's one more test to perform. A friend of Park's, maritime historian Simon Mills, has made a stunning discovery. Buried in British archives, original documents from designer Thomas Andrews' assistant Edward Wilding, showing that in February 1912, a seam on Titanic was changed just before she sailed. January 1912, just 3 months before Titanic's maiden voyage, her sister ship Olympic hits a severe storm. Rivet problems cause a seam to leak.
They had suffered some loosened rivets and some seeping of water that sent her back to the dry dock where repairs were made. And for Titanic, they decided that to keep this from happening to her, they would add a reinforcing strap.
To reinforce Titanic, rivets are drilled out, an extra strap of steel is added, and new rivets put in. This original drawing shows the new steel marked in red. And where was this seam that was changed? Boiler Room 6.
At exactly the same place that Barrett had seen this water coming in.
Was this last-minute change a terrible mistake? Did the redesign of the seam create a fatal flaw?
We need to test this seam to see if the modification made to Titanic made her weaker.
Just like the original seam, the new seam will be tested in the same way.
Let's go ahead and put the pressure on.
10,000. 25,000 pounds.
Here he goes.
And it's about like 35,000 pounds right now.
Again, a rivet pops, but the others hold.
At this point, that's still a watertight seam.
The idea of the rivets just unzipping, I don't see that yet.
No, not at all.
As a single rivet failed, the other rivets picked up the load, and they failed.
No unzipping of rivets, and if anything, the modified seam is even stronger than the original.
From rivet to rivet.
Neither the seam nor the rivets appears to be a fatal flaw.
There is some stretching and...
Every single one of our wrought iron rivets had cracks in the head, flaying around the edges. Yet as imperfect as they were, those rivets outlasted the steel plate.
Probably the iceberg did open up a seam, but not because the rivets or design were defective. The force was simply overwhelming. But whatever caused the seam to open, with too few lifeboats, at least 1,000 people are now doomed. First-class passengers like George Rosenshine and Maybelle Thorne have the best chance. They're first to get the word to evacuate. But George will probably have to stay behind. The rule is women and children first. For Witching Waves mechanic Franz Pullbaum, the odds are grim. 92% of the men in second class will die before this night is out. And it doesn't look good for Irish immigrant Margaret Devaney either. Even though she's female, more than half the women in third class will not survive. Ever since the expedition returned, Ken Marshall and RMS Titanic historian Bill Souder have been trying to identify new pieces of wreckage. One especially intriguing piece is an enormous pile east of the stern.
To come across an unknown massive debris this huge for the first time, it was like skyrockets going off.
After months of work on their own, they get together and compare notes.
The height of this thing at being 25 meters.
To the ordinary eye, it's a confusing mass of twisted metal. But to these experts, it speaks volumes.
We've got one of these very identifiable looped water pressure pipes, which the third funnel had many of.
A piece of pipe with a distinctive hairpin curve.
There's the expansion joint, the cover plate, that actually goes into the massive wreckage. It's an integral part of whatever this is.
A brass plate that covered the expansion joint, a seam in the upper structure.
We've got a deck light mounted sideways to a vertical bulkhead, and those only existed on boat deck.
A distinctive light fixture from the very same area of the ship as the curved pipe and brass cover plate.
Well, I've got my vote for where this pile came from. I see a lot of evidence for it being right there, underneath the third funnel.
I agree. There's no question the core of this object is built around the number 3 funnel.
A huge new piece, never before identified.
This was a big chunk of Titanic we had no idea existed.
Some pieces of the puzzle are starting to fall into place. We've got the entire bottom 70 feet of missing space here, and now we've got the top of it. This is starting to tell us something.
Over the next few months, the team identifies other major chunks of Titanic's fracture zone. A year after the expedition, they can now virtually reassemble the missing middle.
The stickhouse debris is up there. Later, when we got the tower debris and fit it right there, we found out that it was these two sections were separated only by the expansion joint.
The team is closing in on the mystery, starting to reverse engineer the sinking, deconstruct the breakup, and learn if Titanic had a fatal flaw. In the year since the expedition, the team has been working to reverse engineer the sinking, deconstruct the breakup, and learn if Titanic had a fatal flaw. As the 100th anniversary of Titanic approaches, in Woods Hole, the scientists are sharing revelations from their work so far.
This is bathymetric data collected by
Oceanographer Dave Gallo leads off.
When we moved into the area, we had a
Studying the sonar map, he's made a shocking discovery.
These dunes are huge. That's the bow here, and you can see many of these dunes actually dwarf the ship itself.
Huge ridges of sand, not photographed, but obvious on the sonar map, are creeping inexorably toward Titanic.
These are large amounts of sand actually moving across the seafloor. So you can imagine if they're active today, one of these things could run right over the top of the Titanic debris field.
It's long been assumed that the wreck will eventually rust away. But perhaps Titanic's ultimate fate is to be buried.
Can you show the track of that dive?
Next, NOAA's Jim Delgado reports on the archaeological work to date.
Every piece of the hull has been looked at, and in terms of where things are located on the seabed, there are patterns.
Heavy ship parts are clustered near the stern. Lighter debris like coal and dishes farther away. They probably took longer to fall and were carried by the current.
You can see that the outer hull of the ship, the shell.
Now, underwater imaging expert Bill Lang presents stunning new pictures.
Finally, now we've got that wide-angle view that we've always wanted.
A look at Titanic that has never been seen until now. This incredible mosaic is 1,200 individual photos stitched together. No camera lens has ever been able to capture this much detail in a single shot. And this, the stern, also mosaicked from over 1,000 images. Where the ship broke, the main engines are exposed, each as tall as a 3-story building.
Notice pretty strong current.
To Bill Lang, these mosaics are clues about how Titanic hit the bottom.
I think what we're looking at is that the bow impacted the seafloor at the forward end and collapsed down upon impact, which caused all of this decking collapse and bulging out of the sides in this area.
How the data has been collected. So, for
The
example,
science team will continue working for years to come with the data from this expedition.
That where we've used several different...
Hey, Ken Parks.
Meanwhile, Park Stevenson, Ken Marshall, and Bill Souder have focused on the breakup. How did Titanic come apart? Was there a fatal flaw? After a year of painstakingly studying key pieces of new debris, the way they broke, and their location on the map, this team now believes they finally know what happened as Titanic went down. April 14th, 1912, 11:40 p.m. She strikes the iceberg. By 2:15 a.m., it's the beginning of the end. The bow pulls down. The stern rises. Funnels collapse. The ship fractures. The entire bow hangs on the double bottom. Amazingly, it holds on. Finally, the double bottom lets go. The bow heads down. It sails as it falls, taking perhaps 5 minutes to reach the bottom. The cargo hatch flies off. The structure creases and the back end collapses. The fate of the bow seems straightforward. The team believes it's what happened to the stern that reveals if Titanic had a fatal flaw. Once the double bottom releases the bow, the stern briefly settles back.
And eyewitnesses saw the stern settle back and for a moment thought, well, maybe the ship will float after all.
But it's just a cruel illusion. Now she starts down. Boilers fall out. The deck house tears off. The double bottom bends back and separates. Now, deck house and double bottom sail off to the east. The stern inverts and goes into a spiral. The tower debris and galley decks come off. Finally, it hits, blowing out the sides and top. No one can say for certain what happened once Titanic disappeared. But the team believes this scenario is supported by evidence on the sea floor. 1. The double bottom. The forward edge of the front piece is stretched, which would result from its holding the weight of the bow. 2. The profusion of debris to the right of the stern and the smearing of the mud to the left suggests the stern fell in a spiral motion. 3. The position of the deckhouse debris far to the east.
We suspect, based upon where that debris is located in the debris map, that that piece must have separated in the first large spiral of the stern section.
And there's more, the most significant evidence of all. This expedition has shown that the missing middle was not pulverized into bits, but survived as huge chunks, suggesting they broke free in giant sections. For large sections to break away intact and survive all the way to the bottom tells this team the answer to the ultimate question. Was Titanic a weak ship?
Was Titanic a weak ship? The answer that we're taking from this expedition is quite the opposite. Weak rivets, possible flaws in design. What we found has disproven a lot of that. Titanic's gotten a bad rap in recent years. Her own builder gave her only an hour to an hour and a half to live. She lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Titanic broke because she was subjected to stresses that no structure could withstand.
But if Thomas Andrews' design can't be faulted, where does blame for Titanic lie? Captain Smith for speeding through an ice field? Reckless, perhaps, but in 1912, not unheard of.
He was following the routine at the time. It was customary for captains to proceed at their cruising speed until ice was actually sighted, and then they would take precautions.
White Star Chairman Bruce Ismay for inadequate lifeboats. But in fact, Titanic actually had more lifeboats than the law required. Experts assumed they wouldn't need to hold everyone. Radio would call other ships to the rescue.
Lifeboats are mainly to move people from a ship that's sinking to one that has come to rescue it. Another ship would pull up, and you would use the lifeboats to transfer them.
But on April 15, 1912, a place in a lifeboat was the difference between life and death. Maybelle Thorne gets a seat and survives. George Rosenshine and Franz Pohlbaum do not. Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews also die. Bruce Ismay makes it to a lifeboat, but as the CEO who saved himself when women and children died, his reputation is forever shattered. Margaret Devaney ends up in the same lifeboat as Ismay. When the sailor in charge finds the oars lashed together, it's Margaret's pocket knife he uses to cut them free. In the end, 700 people made it into a lifeboat and survived. Today, lifeboat seats for everyone is the law. But what good is enough lifeboats if there's no time to launch them? 3 years after Titanic, the Lusitania in 1915, the Andrea Doria in 1956, and in January 2012, the Costa Concordia. 3 state-of-the-art ships that rolled on their side as they sank, making many of their lifeboats unusable. Titanic remained stable for 2 hours and 40 minutes. All of her lifeboats were used.
I am convinced that no other ship then on the ocean would have performed under the circumstances as well as Titanic.
All along, we've been looking for potential flaws that killed about 1,500 people, but instead, I think we've actually found evidence that Titanic saved about 700 lives.
I think there's a lot of evidence that Titanic was built a lot better than she's been given credit for.
A century after Titanic's sinking, mysteries are solved, reputations restored, and the entire wreck site has finally been documented. Scientists and historians will study the data for years to come, and new findings will continue to emerge. But thanks to this team, the world now knows more than ever about how this became the final resting place of Titanic.